What if the scariest thing at night isn't a ghost, but something very real, standing right outside your door? Evan wasn't running toward a new life. He was running away from an old one. His marriage had crumbled. His spirit was worn down, and the city's noise had become unbearable. When his grandfather passed, leaving behind a weathered farmhouse tucked deep in the Alabama woods, Evan didn't hesitate. He packed up, left the wreckage of his old life behind, and told himself this house would be the reset he needed. At first, it worked. Days were quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of stillness where you can hear your own thoughts, for better or worse. Nights stretched long, filled only with the distant hum of cicadas, the creak of floorboards, and the occasional sigh of the wind through the trees. Then came the sound. The first time it happened, Evan woke to a faint whistle at exactly 1:17 a.m. It was soft, playful, like someone idly whistling a tune from far away. He froze in bed, heart hammering. It lasted only a few seconds before fading into silence. He convinced himself it was nothing. The wind, an animal, his imagination. But the next night, it came again. Same time, same tune. Louder, closer. By the third night, the whistle wasn't coming from the woods anymore. It was at the edge of his porch. Panicked, Evan called the sheriff, hoping to catch some prankster. But the officer's face twisted into something almost like pity. He told Evan that his grandfather had reported the same thing. Always at 1:17 a.m., always a whistle, always closer each night. No intruder was ever caught, and eventually, the old man stopped calling. That night, Evan sat awake, shotgun in his lap, staring at the door, and right on time, the whistle returned, circling the house, echoing against the windows, slipping through the cracks like it was inside the walls. He flipped through his grandfather's old journals, desperate for answers, and found a chilling entry scratched into the pages. It waits for me inside now. I don't know how much longer I can keep it out. And just like that, Evan realized this wasn't a prank. It wasn't something he could fight off. It was something much older, and it had already found its way inside. When I was a kid, summers meant freedom. My grandparents lived in a small countryside village where the air smelled like fresh grass and wood smoke, and everyone knew each other by name. We spent our days running through fields, climbing trees, and inventing games until the sun dipped low. One afternoon, an elderly woman from the village asked us for a simple favor. Could we gather some wild mint that grew in the open field just outside the woods? We thought nothing of it. To us, it sounded like an adventure. So we set off, laughing, pockets ready to be stuffed with green leaves. The field stretched wide under the sky, the mint growing in thick clusters along the edges. My friends and I spread out, chatting and joking as we worked. That's when we saw them, two figures, standing at the far end of the field. Teenagers, maybe a little older, dressed in black from head to toe. They didn't look like anyone from the village. Their faces were pale, their eyes fixed on us in a way that made my skin crawl. At first, they just stood there, watching. Then, slowly, they started walking toward us. One of them smiled, raising a hand as if in greeting. The other called out, voice strangely calm, Come with us. We want to show you something." We froze. Something about their tone didn't feel right. They weren't asking, they were insisting. My friend beside me laughed nervously, assuming it was some kind of joke. But the way they moved closer, step by step, never breaking eye contact, made my stomach knot. Then Julian, the oldest of our group, whispered urgently, "Run." We didn't hesitate. The field erupted with the sound of children bolting to the tall grass, our little feet pounding the dirt. Behind us, the strangers began to run too. Their footsteps were heavy, faster than ours, closing the distance. Branches slapped at our arms and faces as we plunged into the woods, adrenaline pushing us forward. I dared to glance over my shoulder and saw one of them almost at my heels, his pale face twisted into something between a grin and a snarl. But we knew these woods. We zigzagged through hidden paths, squeezing between trees too narrow for grown bodies to follow easily. By the time we burst back into the village, breathless and terrified, the strangers had vanished. The adults brushed it off, saying we were just imagining things. Probably some travelers passing through, they told us. But we knew what we saw. Two strangers dressed in black, waiting in that field for reasons we never wanted to know. And to this day, I still wonder what would have happened if we hadn't run when we did. When I was little, my parents hired a babysitter named Michelle. She was in her early 20s, soft-spoken, and always carried a warm smile. To us kids, she was almost like an older sister, someone who would play games with us, read stories, and keep the shadows away when the nights felt too long. But one summer, Michelle told my parents she needed to take time off. She said she was going to stay with relatives for a while, maybe travel. My parents didn't think much of it. And since school was out, they decided my siblings and I would spend those weeks with our grandparents instead. At first, it was normal. The days were filled with sunshine, chores around the farm, and the comforting smell of my grandmother's cooking. But nights felt different. It started with footsteps, soft at first, outside the windows, circling the house long after everyone had gone to bed. Then came the humming, a low tune, almost like a lullaby, drifting through the cracks of the shutters. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard it again, except this time, it wasn't humming. It was a voice. "Come outside, it's me, Grandpa." I froze. My grandfather was asleep in the other room. I knew his voice, and this wasn't it. My heart pounded as the voice grew more insistent, calling my name, urging me to step outside into the dark. I pulled the blanket over my head and stayed as still as possible until the voice faded. But I couldn't shake the dread that whoever it was, they weren't gone. The next day, my grandparents noticed strange things around the property. The barn door left open. Tools moved. Footprints in the dirt leading up to the porch. They kept a closer eye on us after that, but they didn't say much, maybe to keep us from panicking. Then one night, everything came to a head. We were woken by the sound of glass shattering. My grandfather grabbed his shotgun and rushed downstairs. From the window, I saw him confronting a man in the yard. His clothes were ragged, his eyes wild. In his hands, he carried something that made my blood run cold. An axe. The man didn't run when the police arrived. Instead, he screamed Michelle's name over and over until they dragged him away. It turned out he was Michelle's ex-boyfriend. She hadn't gone away to visit family that summer. She had been hiding from him. He had followed her before, stalked her, threatened her, and when she disappeared, he decided to come looking for her through us. If he had managed to get inside that house, if he had lured one of us out into the dark, I don't even want to think about how it would have ended. To this day, I still hear that voice sometimes, echoing in my mind. Come outside, it's me, Grandpa. When I was 16, my bedroom was on the second floor of our house, overlooking the backyard. It was the perfect spot for privacy. No one could sneak up to my window without a ladder, and at night, all I could see were the quiet silhouettes of trees swaying in the wind, until one night I woke to the sound of knocking. At first, I thought I was dreaming. 3 sharp taps right on the glass. I sat up, heart pounding, staring at the window. Nothing there. No shadows, no movement. Just the pale glow of the moon. I told myself it had to be a branch, but there were no trees close enough to touch the house. The next night, it happened again. This time, I was wide awake when I heard it. 3 knocks, perfectly spaced, right against the glass. I flicked on my lamp and pulled the curtains back. Nothing. By the 3rd night, I was too scared to sleep. I sat up in bed, waiting. Sure enough, at exactly 2:33 a.m., the knocks came. Only this time, they didn't stop at 3. The sound grew louder, faster, almost frantic, like fists pounding to get inside. I screamed for my parents, and when they burst into the room, the knocking stopped instantly. My dad ran outside with a flashlight, scanning the lawn. There were no footprints in the dirt, no ladder, no sign anyone had been there. The police said it was probably a prank. But here's the part one never told anyone. When I checked the glass the next morning, there were handprints. Small, too small for any adult, and they were on the inside of the window. It was late one summer night when my cousin and I were driving back from a concert on the highway that cut through miles of empty farmland. The road was dark, only our headlights cutting through the night. That's when we saw her, a woman, standing on the shoulder, wearing a pale dress that looked out of place in the middle of nowhere. She raised her arms slowly, signaling for us to stop. Against my better judgment, my cousin pulled over. The woman opened the back door without a word and slid inside. She smelled faintly of perfume, old-fashioned, the kind your grandmother might wear. We asked her where she was headed. She gave us an address, quiet and polite, though she never looked either of us in the eye. We drove in silence, the hair on my neck standing on end the entire time. When we reached the address, my cousin turned to tell her we had arrived, but the back seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. There was no sound of anyone leaving. She was just gone. Shaken, we went to the door of the house and knocked. An elderly man answered. When we told him what had happened, his face went pale. He whispered, almost to himself, "That's my wife's dress. She died 20 years ago on that very road." When my brother and I were kids, we weren't allowed in the basement. My parents said it was dangerous. Too many old tools, sharp things, and broken furniture piled up. But every so often, when I passed the basement door, I swore I could see light leaking out from the crack at the bottom. One night, curiosity got the better of me. While everyone was asleep, I crept out of bed and tiptoed to the basement door. Sure enough, a faint yellow glow flickered beneath it, like a candle. I held my breath and listened. At first, it was quiet. Then I heard it. Voices. Not one, but several. Whispering. Too low to understand. My skin prickled, and I pressed my ear to the wood. The whisper stopped. And then, from the other side of the door, someone whispered my name. I bolted back to my room, heart racing. The next morning, I asked my parents about it. My mom's face went pale, and she shook her head. We don't keep any lights down there. That night, the basement door was padlocked, and it's never been opened since. Back when I was 12, my family still used a landline phone. It sat in the hallway on this little wooden table with a notepad and a pencil my mom always kept nearby. Most nights it was quiet, maybe a call from my grandparents or one of my dad's co-workers. But one night, close to midnight, the phone rang. The sound cut through the silence of the house, and I remember jumping out of bed, startled. My dad picked up first, his voice groggy. He listened for a few seconds, then frowned and handed the receiver to me. "It's for you," he said. I thought it had to be a mistake. Who would be calling me at that hour? My heart was already racing as I pressed the phone to my ear. At first, there was nothing, just breathing, slow, steady, and far too close to the receiver. "Hello?" I whispered. Nothing. Just that raspy sound, like someone trying not to be heard. I repeated myself, louder this time, and then the voice came. A man's voice. Deep, strained, almost like a growl. "I can see you." I froze where I stood, eyes darting around the dark hallway. My reflection glared back at me from the window across the room, but beyond that, nothing. I felt like I was being watched from every corner. My dad grabbed the phone back, demanding to know who it was. But the line went dead. We thought it was a prank, until the calls kept coming. Every night for the next week, always around midnight, the same routine. The phone would ring, the breathing would start, and then those same 4 words. "I can see you." My parents reported it to the phone company, and they agreed to trace the next call. So we waited. Sure enough, at exactly 12:03 a.m., the phone rang. My mom answered, stalling for time while the technician worked on the trace. A few minutes later, the phone company called back. Their words chilled us to the bone. "The call is coming from inside your house." My dad tore through the rooms with a baseball bat, searching every closet, every corner, but we never found anyone. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep without checking under the bed and behind the curtains. To this day, I still wonder if maybe, just maybe, the caller never left. My cousin grew up in an old farmhouse out in the country. It was the kind of place that looked charming from the outside. White siding, a big wraparound porch, acres of fields. But inside, there were parts of the house that always felt wrong. At the very top of the stairs, directly across from the hallway, was a heavy wooden door with an iron latch. It was always locked. No one ever went inside, and no one ever talked about it. Whenever we asked, my aunt and uncle would just say, "That room stays closed. Don't touch it." Naturally, as kids, that only made us more curious. One summer night during a sleepover, my cousin and I decided to break the rule. We waited until the house was quiet, then snuck upstairs with a flashlight. My cousin, always the brave one, pulled a bobby pin from her hair and fiddled with the latch. After a few tries, there was a click, and the door slowly creaked open. The first thing that hit us was the smell, stale, musty air that hadn't moved in decades. The room itself was bare, except for a single rocking chair in the center. But it was moving. Not much, just a slow, steady back and forth, as if someone had been sitting there and just stood up. We froze in the doorway, whispering back and forth about whether it was a draft or maybe we bumped the floorboards. Then the chair stopped, dead still. That's when we heard it. A whisper, soft but clear, from somewhere right behind us. "You shouldn't be here." We bolted, slamming the door shut. We tore down the stairs and hid under the blankets until morning. Years later, when my cousin's family finally moved out, my aunt told us the truth. The room had belonged to the house's original owner, a man who was found lifeless in that very chair decades before they bought the place. And according to her, the room had been locked ever since, because every time they opened it, strange things started happening in the house. Even now, whenever I think about that night, I can still hear that whisper warning us. The house I grew up in had this narrow staircase, old wood, steep steps, the kind that always creaked when you walked on them. During the day, it was nothing special, just part of the house. But at night, when the lights were off, that staircase seemed to swallow up all the shadows. I usually stayed up later than my parents, lying on the couch in the living room watching TV. From where I sat, I had a clear view of the staircase. Most nights, it was just an empty stretch of darkness. But one night, I muted the TV for a second and heard it, a faint creak, like someone putting weight on one of the steps. I turned, and there, at the bottom of the stairs, was a figure. It was tall, too tall. Its shoulders seemed to brush the walls, its body blacker than the shadows around it. I thought it had to be my dad, but when I called out, it didn't answer. It didn't move. It just stood there watching me. Then, slowly it began to climb, one step at a time, each board groaning under its weight. I backed up, my heart racing, but when I blinked, just for a split second, it was gone. I told myself it had to be my imagination, maybe a trick of the light, but the sound stuck with me. Every few nights after that, when the house was quiet, I'd hear the staircase creak again, just one step, never more. The strangest part? Whenever it happened, the dog would stand at the base of the stairs, hackles raised, growling at something I couldn't see. I finally asked my parents if either of them ever went downstairs in the middle of the night. They looked at me like I was crazy. "We never use those stairs after dark," my mom said. So to this day, when the house settles at night, I avoid looking at the staircase, because sometimes I still hear those slow, heavy steps, and I know I'll see that shadow again. And those were just some of the creepiest true encounters people swear really happened. Whether you believe in ghosts, shadows, or things we can't explain, one thing's for sure: once the sun goes down, the world feels a whole lot less safe. The scariest part? Most of these stories never had answers. No explanations. No closure. Just moments that stuck with people forever, lingering in the back of their minds every time they hear a creak in the dark or catch a glimpse of movement where no one should be. So tonight, when the lights go out and the house gets quiet, will you sleep peacefully? Or will you find yourself listening for that faint sound in the silence, the one that reminds you you're not really alone?